to Civic Concord, a podcast where we share information, highlight important topics, and hear directly from people involved in town government. This is a Minuteman Media Network production. Today's conversation is part of our 2026 annual town meeting series, and we're going to be talking about Article 35, Wireless Communication Bylaw. And I'm joined today by Planning Board member Abby Flanagan. Hi, Abby.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. And how long have you been on the planning board?
So I've been involved in town government for almost a decade now, and I've been on the planning board for 3 years.
Okay, great. And you're going to be able to present this article at town meeting.
I am. I am the lucky chosen one.
And so I wanted to open up to talk a little bit about wireless coverage in Concord beyond the bylaw, just to set the stage. I want to say that we do have a podcast on this topic that we will link in the show notes, because if people are interested in learning more about, why we are or where we are with cell coverage in town, and what projects we're moving forward right now, that might be a good listen. It's not a surprise to anyone that we have a coverage problem here. If you're coming to town meeting at the high school, you will notice that coverage is pretty poor here. It's one of the main 3 areas that has weak coverage. And so this has been a top priority and goal for the select board for the past several years. There's been a few different strategies for how to attack this. And one of them that we've been working on is to use municipal property to work with vendors and carriers to install infrastructure to improve coverage. And we do have a number of projects that we're working on, one in the center, one in the at the landfill, which will improve coverage along Route 2 and at CCHS. We have a small cell effort that is moving forward in the center with AT&T, and we continue to research possibilities for the West Concord Village Center. So there are some efforts moving forward, and another way we're looking to set the stage to improve coverage is through wireless. So that's what we're here to talk about today, and we have our local expert here, Abby, to help us. So to start off here, local zoning can play a role in whether wireless providers are able to install facilities. Certainly, how does Concord's current bylaw affect that process?
So it affects it in a number of ways, and I think it's important to put the current bylaw in context. Mm-hmm. So the current bylaw was adopted in 1998, and now, while we all think 1998 was 10 years ago, it's actually almost 28 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And I want you to think back to what your cell phone, if you even had one,
I did not,
looked like 28 years ago. I had this big clunky car phone that was a hand-me-down, I think, from my dad and his old car. And it really had a limited range. You could basically use it to call AAA on the highway. In the last 28 years, wireless technology has changed dramatically and rapidly. The zoning bylaw has remained stagnant. And so
we haven't touched it, really.
We haven't touched it. No, it simply doesn't match current technology, current communication strategies, and it's not working for us. It's not working for the town. And I think anybody who has driven through the center of town and had their call dropped, I've got 3 kids, 2 are at Alcott, 1 is at Ripley. If you've ever tried to call anybody or text anybody at Alcott, you've got 1 kid on the playground, 1 kid at home. You can't do that.
Yeah. And we've had listening sessions where emergency room doctors at Emerson are, not getting their calls to go in, and public safety emergencies.
It's a critical safety issue. The school superintendent and our principal will say that if the phones go down, there's really no backup without wireless coverage. So anyone who's driven around town knows that this is an issue. And what we're trying to do with the update to the zoning bylaw is really right-size our zoning and our approval process for current technologies. And that's what we're endeavoring to do with this warrant article this year.
Great. The bylaw relies heavily on the wireless overlay district right now. I think that's how it was designed, trying to highlight areas where maybe wireless would work. How does that affect kind of where providers have been able to place facilities?
I will say that it was less designed to highlight where it would work, and it was more designed to keep it out.
Okay.
So it was really structured that we wanted it along major roadways like Route 2, and we pretty much didn't want it anywhere else. And so the wireless overlay district is so restrictive that it doesn't allow carriers to close gaps in coverage. Just full stop. It really just doesn't. We can't locate facilities where they need to be. And so one of the things that we're proposing to scrap the whole bylaw. Some of that is just for the simplicity's sake of if we replace it, it's just cleaner and easier for people to kind of read and understand. We're removing the wireless overlay district.
Yep.
And we're thinking more critically about where these individual facilities go. So as opposed to a blanket opposition, we take them on a case-by-case basis, which seems to be much more reasonable. And the thing that I also want to remind people of is that removing the overlay district doesn't mean that a month from now, there's going to be a giant cell tower next to the Civil War Monument. The same HDC, Historic District Commission, regulations apply. The same environmental regulations apply. So the critical sensitive areas that were excluded still continue to be excluded. We're just removing that structure that had kept it limited to so few places.
There are many controls in place and opportunities for evaluation, beyond that one kind of piece.
Yes, that was one tool, and it's just so out of date that it's not really useful anymore.
That makes sense. One thing you talked about at the public hearing, and if folks haven't had a chance to watch that, it's all live on our webpage.
It's a real barn burner. The zoning amendments are always really thrilling.
We're trying to make it fun today.
I know, we're doing our best.
But one challenge that I think you mentioned is the federal telecommunications law and how that places certain limits on how municipalities can regulate wireless, because since it is such a public safety critical infrastructure, there's only so much we can really do.
Exactly. So there's been a lot of changes to federal law since we adopted our zoning bylaw. And the simple fact of the matter is that the current zoning bylaw doesn't match the federal law. And we need to be in compliance with that. And so there's just some changes that we need to make to bring our zoning bylaw into compliance, which is, that's just the reality of federal law. And we have to kind of make them match. And that's one piece of what the new zoning bylaw does, is it brings us into compliance.
And so instead of kind of tweaking here and there and redlining this 1998 bylaw, the decision was to replace it, right?
Yes. And anyone who's ever tried to read a red line document knows how it's painful and it's complicated. And I think it makes it really confusing. We use amendments and we use small changes when we're making small changes. We're making a pretty big change. And it's much easier. And I think it'll be both better for the town and better for wireless carriers to replace the bylaw in full.
And so at a high level, what are the key changes residents should understand? And I'll say, if folks haven't received their briefing book yet, they'll get it in the mail soon. And there is a nice FAQ in there. There's also a chart that breaks down. That was a big piece of feedback from the public hearing. Can you put together a chart? What's the same? What's different? And that, I think the planning board answered that call in a nice way. So maybe you could.
So, and I will say that the briefing book's available online right now. So if you just can't wait until you get it in your hot little hands, you can check it out on the town's website. I even found it really helpful. Like I've been in the weeds on these for months and months and months, in some cases years. And it's really nice to see the information distilled like that.
Yeah.
And so the big things, well, I want to back up a moment, because what I want to talk about first is kind of what zoning is. I think zoning can be really confusing, and I think it can be a little off-putting for people because it's very technical and it feels like it's a little overwhelming and hard to understand. Zoning is about creating possibilities, not probabilities. So changing the zoning bylaw doesn't mean that we're going to wake up the day after town meeting and have fantastic cell coverage throughout town. Unfortunately, I wish we had a magic zoning wand that we could wave and make that happen. This allows for the possibility of wireless carriers to come to the town and the community and propose solutions. That's really what it allows. It doesn't guarantee anything. It just allows us to work through some processes. So the big things that people need to know is we're removing the overlay district. So that changes. And that opens up the possibility of more places that we could consider this. The other thing that it does is before, everything was by a special permit. which I hope none of you have had to go before the ZBA for a special permit because it's a really arduous process. It's very technical. It involves a lot of time. It involves a lot of money. And so this gives us kind of 3 different paths. So the first path is a simple building permit. And that would be for something like swapping out old equipment.
Okay.
So you have a wireless carrier that currently has an antenna, let's say at, Emerson Hospital, and they want to swap out equipment for newer equipment. Newer, safer, better. That's a building permit.
Yep.
That's a simple process. They go to the building commissioner. Pretty easy. The other
upload all their plans.
And there's still all the same
instruction, safety.
same oversight, same inspections, same approvals and permits, and all the rest. The other 2 paths are more involved.
Mm-hmm.
So there's site plan review and special permit. Now, site plan review would be used for something like co-locating an antenna. You have an existing one, you have another carrier who wants to put an antenna there as well. You go to site plan review. Now, the important thing to know about site plan review and special permit is they both still involve public hearings.
And that is posted in the newspaper.
That is a properly noticed public hearing, which allows for public comment. And this is the other thing that I want to tell people about zoning is we actually love public comment.
Yeah.
I like it when people attend the meetings. I like it when people submit feedback online. I will say that for every planning board member, every single letter that gets submitted to us on an application, we read.
Mm-hmm.
And we take that feedback very seriously. And public comment is a very important part of the process. So both site plan review and special permit will involve public hearings. Site plan review will be before the planning board, special permit before the zoning board of appeals. So there's still an opportunity for public input. And I know that's a concern for people. It'd be a concern for me. I wouldn't want a project moving forward near my house that I didn't have the opportunity to comment on. This still provides that. And I think that's important for folks to know. So I don't want people to be nervous that all of a sudden the new bylaw allows this all to happen behind the scenes. It's still very much a public process.
Right. And so I think we've talked about the equipment swap. Okay. The other example is more
an
of
antenna.
Co-locating, or are there other examples of?
So a big one for special permit would be like a new tower.
So new tower would get as much oversight as possible.
Much oversight as it
Everything
currently
we
does.
have, right?
It gets both barrels of oversight,
which is a lot.
and it's designed that way because a new standalone
Sure.
tower is a big deal.
It's major, and I think for the listeners, we're talking here about local permitting through the ZBA, through the planning board, and through our building and electrical. There are another whole host of permitting that also goes into something like that, which most equipment actually, which is state and federal permitting, and carriers and they have to go through kind of state historical reviews, consultations with Native American tribes.
This is a reason why it's taken so long and why this process moves so slowly, which, to be honest, I'm okay with it moving slowly for big projects.
Certainly.
Something like swapping out old equipment or co-locating antenna should be a simpler process. Something like a tower should be robust and transparent. It should take time. It should take into account community concerns. It should take into account gaps in coverage, all of that. So this bylaw just right sizes some of this to the actual project. Mm-hmm. So instead of making blanket statements that, all wireless communication services should go through this, it looks at the individual projects and puts them on a track.
One thing I've been talking about with some of the planning board members through the series is being really clear and transparent through what we're looking for here in Concord, so that there isn't a kind of expectation for a number of waivers. Could you talk about that a little bit? I think knowing what this community wants to see is better business practice for carriers or for anyone who's looking to apply, and
it makes the process clear. And there's a difference between conditions and site plan review and waivers.
Okay.
So waivers are like we're just waiving requirements. We say, yeah, you're supposed to do that, but we're not going to make you.
Right.
So that's a really kind of squishy system to work under. It doesn't provide a lot of clarity to carriers. It also doesn't provide a lot of clarity or consistency for the community necessarily. Conditions on site plan say you are required to do the following things. Mm-hmm. And we make that clear kind of upfront. We talk about, fall zones for safety, and we talk about, lighting and we talk about distance and we talk about, height requirements and all of that, and you put those conditions in place, it's just a clearer roadmap and it's a little bit less ambiguous, which as a community member makes me feel better about the process because I kind of know what to expect. And then it makes it more appealing for carriers because they know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And so the goal for this is not to make it, easy peasy lemon squeezy. It's to make it clear. It's to make it understandable for both carriers and the community. They know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And our hope is that with a clear kind of tailored process, that it will be more appealing for carriers to come in and try to close those gaps in coverage by engaging in the public process.
Absolutely. I'm wondering what kind of questions did you get at the hearing, and how have those been addressed?
Yeah, so we always get, the tough thing about the public hearing is that we always do a bit of adjustment after
Mm-hmm.
because we've been working on these projects for someone like you for years. For the planning board, this was a mandate from the last town meeting. And so, we've spent the last 12 months kind of really taking a hard look at this. And then a lot of times people will come to it for the first time at our public hearing. And so we're so in the weeds on it that we really kind of know it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we forget we've got to communicate a lot more information to the public. So it was helpful to have that. I think the biggest thing is people wanted to understand kind of top level what was changing.
Yep.
What the difference, I always say this, the difference between a building permit and site plan review and special permit can be very confusing if you're not like a zoning nerd.
Mm-hmm.
So explaining the difference between those tracks. People had concerns about removing setbacks. There are still some setbacks in place. One of the reasons we removed setbacks, and there's a map that we'll show at town meeting that shows that if we left all of the setbacks currently in place, it essentially keeps the zoning the same. It doesn't allow for anything.
Okay.
And so those setback concerns will be addressed in the site plan review and special permit process.
Oh, so that even though it's not, a blanket.
No, that's still something that you have to look at. You look at the distance to that. That's the very function of site plan review is you look at the site conditions.
Right.
Okay, we want to put this here. Does this make sense? How close is it to wetlands? How close is it to a historic district? How close is it to surrounding structures? That's all part of site plan review.
It's less of a one-size-fits-all program and more of really considering the neighborhood and the proposal in front of you.
We're trying to tailor things to the actual equipment, the actual location, and the actual changes that they're asking for. So it just makes it a more tailored process, which I think is really helpful. Also because wireless technology has changed so much that it's not just one big tower you put up anymore. Now there's lots of different types of technology, and this allows us to tailor the process to the technology.
Yeah, I appreciate that. As working in the space, I am trying to be careful about the terms we use too, right?
It's confusing.
When you say tower, it's very easy to conjure up the image of a tower, right? But there are other solutions. There are, screened infrastructure that could be in some of the churches you attend or drive by.
That's a great example of like if it's in a steeple or in a cupola or things like that. The less obtrusive it is to the natural and built landscape, the lower kind of level of concern we have about it. There's still a process, whether it's building permit, site plan, or special permit. But it encourages wireless carriers to find these more creative solutions, co-locating, swapping out equipment, internal equipment, because those processes are a little bit more streamlined. To just go out and build something new, that's going to be a more onerous process, as it should be.
Right.
So it encourages the wireless carriers also to try to close gaps in coverage in the kind of the least obtrusive ways.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense for Concord, certainly.
That's what we want. We want to protect our town.
Yep.
That's one of the reasons why we have local zoning is actually it provides opportunity, but it's also a layer of protection for the town. And I will say, having served on the HDC is pretty good about that. When we're talking about historic districts and the National Natural Resources Council, we have other bodies that were also brought into play with these applications.
Yes, several.
Many. We do.
Well, kind of closing out here, what do you hope town meeting members understand about this article before you vote on it? And I'll say, we don't have a lot of time at town meeting to really, it's hard. I think at town meeting, there's so many articles. It's 3 days or 3 nights. And sometimes you might get 6 or 7 minutes to present. it's challenging. So we're asking a lot of town meeting members to review materials before they come in and try to understand these, because if you come in that night, it's just, kind of raw. It's a lot.
It's a
to take
huge
in.
ask. I mean,
it's a lot.
It's one of those things where I'm gonna kind of wax poetic for a moment, but I really love town meeting. I have concerns about the accessibility to it to a large segment of our community, but I love the fact that we bear this responsibility as community members, and that we vote on these things collectively, and that we deliberate them and we take them seriously. Zoning is always one of those ones that makes me a little nervous because it's really dense.
Yeah.
We've been working on these things for months and months and months, and for people to take a fresh look at it with 15 minutes, it's really hard to kind of push through the weeds and understand what it's about. My hope for town meeting is that it's my hope for every town meeting that people come to these with an open mind, that they've read the briefing book. If you have questions, ask them at town meeting, because if you have the question, chances are there's 15 other people that have the question.
Mm-hmm.
It's helpful to ask questions. We want to clarify things for you at town meeting. We want you to be as informed as possible when you hit that clicker. So look through the briefing book, look through the supplemental materials.
If people have questions ahead of time,
If they have
we can
ahead of
help with
time,
that
yeah,
too.
we can help with that too.
Yep.
And I will say, for next town meeting, engage in this process early. If there's a particular topic that you're really interested in or really concerned about, follow that board or commission. They have lots of public hearings. We've been talking about this for months and months and months. I want people to engage in the process early.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to submit public comment. I want them to come with questions, because it is a collaborative process.
And it can shape the outcome. People's
public comment shapes the outcome. Certainly on the planning board, it has on the HDC that I've sat on. The people serving on these boards and commissions, they're your neighbors. They take your input really seriously. And so we're always listening to that. And we always want that feedback. So at town meeting, come with an open mind, listen to the presentations, ask your questions, and hopefully make an informed decision. If we've done our job, I hope that this will pass. I feel really strongly that providing the opportunity to close gaps in coverage is important for public safety. It's important for economic vitality. It's important for our day-to-day functioning. I would like to be able to call my husband when he's at Alcott with the kids on the playground and say, dinner's ready, you guys got to come home.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to be able to do that. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. And I would also, we have such a great kind of, visitor community and tourist community to town. I would like to serve them better.
Yeah.
I'd like our businesses to thrive. I'd like our families to stay connected. I'd like people to be able to work from anywhere and have that flexibility. So I think this gives us a tool in the toolkit to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that at town meeting, we can convince enough people that we're right.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Abby.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it. See everyone at town meeting.